I had to interrupt my little history lesson and just have to say, this cigar has such a wonderful, wonderful little burn to it. You know, straight around, man. Of course, you know, no cigar goes straight around like a cylinder. You have like your little teeny bit of like wavy around it. But I mean, this is a great burn and a great draw. This, what we have forming here on this, here's a cigar that, it's funny, it looks darker than most standard releases, but not really. I've gotten Bolivars darker than this, and Rolón Olones darker than this. You know, for an EL cigar, it's not as dark as they usually are. It's more of a deep tan than that dark chocolatey brown you see a lot of the time. And speaking about what we were talking about a few episodes ago, ash, I hope some of you have had a chance to visit those links I put there, because trust me, don't just ignore them. You will not regret visiting those pages. You know, if you love cigars, then you will love the information often on those pages. We're letting our ash built up. I read a few things about ashes that, you know, I've known to be true in some. First of all, ashes, you know, if ashes just start to fall off all over the place, like, then it's a bad cigar. It might even be a sign of short, broken filler. But it says there that good cigars in ash should at least be able to grow up to a little over an inch. Okay, so here we have a cigar that right now you have a little over a hat. I guess, you know, we're getting there. But that's just one thing they said. They also said while a lot of Cuban cigars, from what we've been saying, you know how we've been saying, you know, look at that nice Cuban ash, look at that nice Cuban ash. There are cases in which Cuban ash does not look like that, and it has to do with the region that most of the tobacco comes from. Tobacco from the Vuelta Bajo region makes that kind of ash, the ash that we've been looking at, and that is what most standard production cigars and a lot of fancier cigars are made of. But there is tobacco that comes from another region that they called, I forget exactly, something El Medio, like the middle region. And it's right adjacent to Vuelta Bajo. It's right next to the fucking thing. Yet, the tobacco that comes out of the ground there causes a completely different ash because of really high potassium levels in the soil. And it creates an ash that's whiter, a lot whiter. Something that looks a little more like this, but even whiter than this. This is kind of in between. So on this EL cigar, it also said, now it said that there's a little sweetness to that, a little bit of kind of like a little like some sort of spice note. It said that the lighter the ash color, the finer the quality of tobacco. Yeah, okay. You know, I tend to agree in some cases and agree. I don't think that's definitive, you know. But in any case, this is an Edicion Limitada cigar, which is supposed to be of better quality than your standard range cigars. And on it, you see a really what is a tighter, much lighter gray ash than what we've seen on any of our other Cuban cigars. But this is, however, definitely, hands down, no doubt about it, 100% authentic. I'm not even, this episode is not about that. This is a real fucking Cuban cigar. And you have a very different ash from what you usually see. But according to that website and those links I showed you, that's okay. What I would say is probably that some of the tobacco in the cigar did not come from Vuelta Bajo. Maybe it came from Pinar del Rio or that medial region, that middle region. So anyway, we are a good way into our first third, about to come around into the second, and throughout the cigar thus far, smoke is really nice and cool now, cushioned by my nice length of ash right here, giving me nice cool smoke. I'm noticing a few Swedish type notes. There's a nice coffee flavor, but not that usual dark coffee flavor I get, that deep flavor. It's more of like a lighter coffee flavor over a base of wood, a little bit oaky, I would say. And once in a while I get a bit of a sourish note, but it's nice. It's a nice type of sourish note. I wouldn't really call it citrus, but it's you know, not on the tip, more in the middle of the tongue. you know what? What's happening? I'm gonna have to. Very nice so far. I would say this cigar is certainly smoothing out from. The flavors are very similar to what I remember them being when I first smoked these when they came out. But it's definitely a lot less harsh. It's definitely smoothed out a lot. Okay, so that's our first third, and that's what's happening there. So let's get a little bit into brand history finally.
Oh, there we are. Check it out. Look at that. Very nice, tighter than usual, and definitely lighter than usual. Tighter and lighter is what we have here. Definitely not as black and charcoaly as our typical Cuban ash, and it makes sense from what I read last night, so you should read that article too. Nice burn on this cigar. Getting a bit crooked now, but alright, let me get this in the ashtray before I get yelled at.
Alright, so okay, where were we up to? 1969, blah blah blah, Cigar Aficionado, early 90s, in an interview with Avelino Lara, formerly the manager, El Guido, okay, he claimed that Fidel Castro gave these fumadores, these Lancero-shaped Trinidads out as diplomatic gifts. And that's what I've heard. However, Fidel says that's bullshit in his autobiography, My Life, and also in an interview later with Cigar Aficionado, he says that he only hands out cohibas. So we have two very contradicting statements, but I would tend to believe the guy who fucking is actually doing the handing out, right? So Fidel says that's crap in his autobiography, that he never handed out Trinidads, that he only hands out cohibas, and he also said it again in a later interview with Cigar Aficionado. So I guess that's a myth about Trinidads being handed out. Sorry, everybody who bought those fumadores. Those are diplomatic gifts, but Fidel didn't like them that much. So maybe they weren't worth as much as you paid for them. Martino's also stated in the, and I gotta get this book. That's another episode. We can look at some of the cigar books I have. There are more of them than you would think. They are hard to find, some of them, but there are a lot of them. And this is the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Post-Revolution Havana Cigars by Min Ron Ni, and I gotta get that book. That Trinidads were a lower-level diplomatic cigar, a lower-level diplomatic gift, made with a blend similar to Cohiba, but without the third barrel fermentation. Now that is a very specific thing to know. This is interesting. For the most part, Trinidads were the same blend as the Cohibas. They were made at the same factory. They were, you know, the original one was based on a Cohiba length, the La Guida number 1, Cohiba Lancero, and everything about them pretty much the same, except for this third barrel fermentation, which is part of the process so that they used to ferment these tobacco leaves to give them this, you know, unique flavor. That unique flavor you get from a Cohiba cigar is many times due to that. Not just the blend, not just the tobacco. Remember, it's all Cuban tobacco, just like every other Cuban cigar brand. And it's used from tobacco from the same fields of all the cigars you smoke. And there is no blending of different nations and all that. It's only, you know, Seco, Volado, Lajero, and you know, Pinar del Rio or fucking Volta Bajo. There's really not that much to choose from. But when it comes to the methods of whether or not to fermenting what, how long you're going to hang dry, age, what you're going to do, sun-grown, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of different things there. So anyway, we have a cigar that's very, very similar in many aspects. But according to this, the Funadore, and that probably would be why Fidel didn't hand them out as gifts. They were actually at a lower level. He probably said, for my diplomatic gifts, I want to give out the best cigars I have. This is a Cuban cigar. I don't want to be, you know, I don't want people to smoke this and say I've had better. You know? Anyway. I want to let this go out here. Fairly creamy smoke. A little bit of a vegetal flavor there, vegetal flavor. Very woody, woody aroma. Spice and pepper, peppery spice, but not too heavy. I would say a mild to medium spiciness. I think that's one of the things that may have toned down a lot in this cigar. In 1995, Cigar Aficionado hosted a dinner in Paris, France, where the guests became the first to taste Trinidad's outside of diplomatic circles. Now, I'm sure that's probably true to a point where these weren't diplomats and they all got to taste Trinidad's, but I'm sure there were diplomats who took these home and gave them to non-diplomats or friends or whatever, so I don't think they were the very first people to taste it outside, but you know what it's supposed to mean. Anyway, in 1998, they were finally released to the public. That's it, 1998. And in one size, the Funadore. So, which is the Laguido #1, same shape as the Laguido #1, or the AKA the Cohiba Lancero. In 2003, that's what I said, right? I think so. 3 new sizes were distributed at a dinner in London by Hunters and Frankow. Good old Hunter and Frankie. So those 3 sizes, I believe they were the Robusto T, the Reyes, and I forget the third one. Forget. It'll pop in my head later, but they were the 3 original sizes. So now you have the Funadores and those 3 sizes, and eventually the bands on the old bands were. That's probably when the bands were upgraded as well. Because when the Funadore was released to the public, it still had that original Trinidad band that, you know, it's just a gold, frosty gold band with the 3 T's. Oh, and that's about it. So, that's all the information I have on Trinidad. It's a fairly new brand. Wow, you know, from what it says here, where the hell? First produced around 1969. So it would be a post-revolution production. Interesting. Interesting. So I think the most interesting thing I found out today was that it's, according to this whole thing, it's bullshit that Fidel handed these things out as diplomatic gifts, and that it was indeed the Cohiba, because the people who talk about that they usually like to say it's bullshit that he hands out Cohibas, he hands out Trinidad's. He doesn't smoke Cohibas, he smokes Trinidad's. So, we have an ongoing debate here. But, according to his autobiography, he said it himself. But who knows if he actually wrote the thing. I mean, he may have had somebody write it for him. You know, I'm sure Fidel didn't sit there and write. No, maybe he did. I mean, maybe he likes to write. But if I was Fidel and I had the power that I had, and, you know, I wanted an autobiography written, I would pretty much dictate it, no pun intended, to somebody else. And, of course, things can get lost in translation, especially if the person being dictated to doesn't really have a wide array of knowledge regarding cigars, and he just starts hearing all these things about Trinidad's and Cohibas and Funadores, and it can easily get mixed up. And then it's going to take a lot of work to get through to Fidel to ask him, hey, is this true? You know, I could write him some fan mail maybe. Okay, so we're getting into the second third nicely. There's a very sweet smell in this aroma of almost a chocolatey smell. Yeah. Kind of a chocolatey smell in this aroma here, which is interesting. More chocolatey than floral. But there is that floral also. Let's see what we got. Coffee. A little bit of maybe like a dark chocolatey type of thing. And spice. Spice is present throughout here, but it's not terrifically strong. And very woody base, very woody type, you know, main note. A little bit of that sourness again there. Tiny bit. I would say that this is a bit complex. That a lot of the flavors in here are pretty subdued, and you know they do come in and out. You know, even when smoking, like you know, letting the ash just grow. Sometimes I'll notice something more than another thing. You know, it has to do with heat, I'm sure, but it also can do with the blend in the leaf and what's in the leaf that they grew this thing in. But you know, sometimes I notice a little more spice. Sometimes I'm not noticing very much sweetness at all. Maybe just like a very, very subdued, you know, type of like what sweetness tastes like without the sugar. But there's really not any kind of nothing like that Partagas short we had, where there's like, you know, there's a definite presence of a graham crackery type sweetness throughout the thing. Not here.